Congratulate UMT for putting this together, and thank you for inviting me. It's always, for me personally, very energizing to see young people. You are the future of this country, and people in educational institutions particularly are, I have a bias towards, I teach whenever I get an opportunity to, and I find there is a lot of learning for me to be done when I interact with youngsters. I was asked to speak on diversity in conflict management. And the speaker, honorable speaker who came here to the dais before me, I think the topic that he very lucidly spoke about, a very critical topic, one close to my heart, but I cannot claim to be an expert on it. Gender inequality, a global phenomena, increasing realization, and obviously in Pakistan, as the honorable speaker was mentioning, I think the statistics speak for itself, and for the issues that we confront. Obviously, women having a voice, women having education, basic amenities, structures of representations, platforms for representations, their representation in power structures, all of that is, only obvious. And very critical, and where, depending on whichever organization one is in, this is one of the things that I always highlight, and we make sure that within the management structure it's taken up, is that women must have a voice. I think that I don't want to go too much into detail, because as I said, I was asked to speak on diversity and conflict in conflict management, and I'll switch to that. But Dr. Salman Shah is here, a former finance minister and advisor to the current government. He is on economic affairs and financial matters and so on. And I guess people like him also have a very important role to play. And I think all sections of society have an important role to play when it comes to issues of women's rights and equality guaranteed in the Constitution of Pakistan. And very correctly, the honorable speaker talked about the examples in our own culture, tradition, and indeed religion, from Hazrat Khatija to Hazrat Aisha to Bibi Fatima, and certainly Bibi Zainab. I mean, if you need to ever talk of an icon, for a lifetime in terms of speaking up for rights, and not just women's rights, but speaking up for principles, for speaking truth to power, etc. Karbala, and following that, Bibi Zainab's role. So anyway, let me switch now to my subject. I was asked, as I said, to speak on diversity in conflict management. So diversity, when you look at our own country, you look at diversity at multiple levels. Obviously, there's gender diversity, but I'm putting that on the side, because when we just spoke about it, and that's something that cuts across all other divides, etc. But when we talk about diversity in conflict management, we are obviously looking at how a society is managed, how a society functions, how those who run a society, elected people, state institutions, and above all the Constitution, which basically is the fountainhead from which all rest flows. It has to, its role essentially is to provide good governance and to address issues and concerns of all of the entire society. Diversity emerges as a factor, and first as a general factor, and then as a divisive factor. Diversity as a divisive factor emerges in the context of crisis of governance. The greater the problems with governance, the greater the problems with delivery of services, of amenities, of basic rights and facilities that are guaranteed in constitutions, like our constitution, the greater the inability of those who run the affairs of the state, the greater the inability to provide the services that and rights, etc., to the entire society, the greater diversity will emerge. That's a basic formula that works in every society, every part of the world. So let's be clear that diversity in and of itself does not create conflict. I was just looking at a few examples, starting from Pakistan itself. If you look at what we experienced in the, immediately after the creation, issues of, there were language riots, there were other issues that emerged, political representation, etc. So wherever there, and when these kinds of issues emerge, they will then obviously give rise to diversity as a divisive force, whether on the basis of ethnicity, whether on the basis of regional divide, whether on the basis of professional groups in society, and so on and so forth. So in Pakistan, or whether ideological divides, there is one diverse entity in democratic societies which is a positive, which is a given, which is political divide. Political parties inherently give diverse and different identities to their followers, but that competition, that diversity is not a diversity which should lead to conflict. It is not a diversity that will lead to challenges to the state. The kind of diversity that leads to challenges to the state, and one that creates problems. For example, as I was driving, I just drove in from Islamabad. On the way, I was looking at the papers, etc. Let me pick up an example of PTM, Pashtun Tahaffuz Mahaz. So if we were to see how this started, we can come to where we stand today, but so with terrorism that hits Pakistani society and much more northern areas, and the tribal areas, sorry, not tribal, North Waziristan, etc., the tribal areas. When terrorism hit these areas, obviously the state had to step in to roll back these terrorists. And while the state was doing that, it had to do it. You had operations like Zarbe-Azb, etc. And an inevitable part of such operations anywhere in the world will be destruction of homes, of markets, etc. That's something that is almost unavoidable. However, after that, the institutions, government, state, etc., decided that those who lost, got financially hit, whether it was their houses being decimated or whether markets, etc., they will get compensation. The compensation has been very slow, if at all, in coming, with the result that these groups, there was this group in 2014 called Masood Tahaffuz Mahaz. So it's an economic reason, a reason where they felt that a reason which flowed from conflict, which flowed from a problem that we all faced in this country, and then an operation which had to be done. So you don't address the problem, you don't fulfill the promise of giving compensation, people will obviously get together and try and fight for their rights. So until Naqibullah Masood, this guy Masood from the Masood tribe, he was killed in extrajudicial killing. Obviously it was a mistaken identity. But Naqibullah Masood in January 2018 was killed in Karachi, and that became a trigger for other people from the Masood tribe to stand up, and then that conflated, that joined together with the Masood Tahaffuz Mahaz, and you had the PTM emerge. So PTM, the roots of PTM were economic. They were standing up for something where they felt they had been wronged and what they wanted had not been delivered. And today it snowballed into a more complicated problem. And yesterday, Manzoor Pashtun was taken into custody because the Peshawar High Court said he had to be taken into custody because there were some speeches which were objectionable. And while Article 19 gives you the right freedom of expression, it says very clearly within reasonable limits. Now, so a problem starts, it snowballs, if it is not addressed, it snowballs into a greater problem, and then you have an issue which you have today. And the identity has, it's today seen as a movement the Pashtuns are leading, because, and then the story becomes much broader, and there are obviously degrees of exaggeration. While we know that the integration of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, formerly frontier of the Pashtuns, in the economy of Pakistan, the integration in terms of the economy, in terms of the power structure, in terms of politics, institutions, the integration is very much there. But if there are problems that are unresolved, then that integration emerges. The integration being there, you still have elements emerge as who take up the rallying cry of the same ethnic group. So Pashtuns, while they're economically, in terms of power, etc., are very much integrated into Pakistan, into the federation, within the decentralized mode of governance that we have. But the fact that the compensation was not paid to these people, and then the killing of this guy, extrajudicial killing, and the killer not brought to task yet, justice has not been delivered. These things develop into conflict. So it's not like that you have to manage, how do you manage diversity in conflict? My submission would be, I would change the title into how does the state, how does good governance deliver to the entire society, deliver to diverse groups, so that the conflict doesn't emerge. I mean, I can give you endless numbers of examples in terms of how mismanagement has led to emergence of diverse groups. But when I say that diversity, whether ethnic or religious or any, diversity isn't inherently reason for conflict. It is not. I mean, there are so many societies. In Switzerland, there are 17 or 32 different little communities that coexist. But that is because the state is responding to the needs of these diverse groups. So diversity there hasn't created conflict in those societies. It's easier said than done, but there is no other option. I mean, those who run the affairs of the state have to address the concerns, etc., of different groups. In Pakistan, when the military ruler, late General Ziaul Haq, he imposed, different laws, and where women, it was contrary to the spirit of the Constitution of Pakistan, then women came out. I mean, WAF, Women's Action Forum, became active, and so on and so forth. And then different groups emerged to basically say our rights have to be delivered. You have in society different, whether this is a business group, whether it's the lawyers obviously overfight for their rights. A general comment, we could discuss that. But in Balochistan, the problems that emerged, what happened in East Pakistan, so when the state doesn't deliver, doesn't address issues, you will, number one, conflict will be inevitable. Number two, your adversaries, external players, will always come in to take advantage. I found it rather amusing that the Afghan president, Mr. Ashraf Ghani, who has to deal with tons of stuff happening at home, the chaos and crisis at home, he tweeted for Pashtun, Manzoor Pashtun, and in his tweet he said, we should be very concerned about societies where civil rights movements aren't don't get the space to express the differences. And when I went on his Twitter timeline, when I went down 2 or 3 tweets below, he was singing praises of the worst kind of fascist that we are seeing in Asia, if not globally right now. That is Mr. Modi. I mean, a fascist see what he's doing in Kashmir, see what he's doing to the people of Kashmir. He's the brutality there. And Mr. Ashraf Ghani, who number one should be concerned about what's happening inside his own country, but then he's singing praises of this brutal fascist Mr. Modi. So obviously double standards there, but because Mr. Ashraf Ghani has his own issues, obviously, and Pakistan, Afghanistan have their own, there's a baggage on both sides. The need in Afghanistan, one, to keep supporting, pushing and speaking up officials, I mean the president speaking up for Manzoor Pashtun, that would be inevitable. We can criticize it, but obviously they will do this. And then, much worse, much more of an interference, etc. And then infiltrate extreme groups who can start attacking the army, who can start, being abusive. And obviously there are certain red lines. Anyway, those are matters of detail. Obviously the Pakistan Armed Forces is an institution, very honorable, an institution we are proud of. When they make wrong decisions, we will stand up and say their decisions are wrong, but the institution is an honorable institution. So anyway, I just took up this example to explain that that you can, in a situation which is otherwise normal, conflict can arise because of, and diversity will be flagged. Diversity becomes then a mobilizing cry. Okay, the Sindh card, Balochistan issue, South Punjab, Mr. Khusro has now forgotten his, very bombastic claims that he was making about creating a South Punjab province. But, that their diversity he used for a different purpose. But diversity will emerge in spaces where the state doesn't deliver, where institutions don't deliver. And let me just end by saying that this is not something that is easy by any means. Pakistan is a complex society, and Pakistan has a complex history. It's a soul which is a tormented soul, whether wars or whether internal conflicts, whether martial laws, etc. But that is not to say that you can still not manage much, much better. And finally, I think that the digital age, in the digital age, giving good governance on the one hand and managing expectations on the other hand, without trying to muzzle voices, without trying to go to Facebook, Google, etc., and saying, make up people, let's see how we can control dissent. I think dissent within the parameters of the Constitution of Pakistan. Let me be very clear. Dissent within the parameters of Constitution of Pakistan must be allowed, and that gives voice to those whose voices, if not heard, can morph into disasters for the state. And we saw that happen in East Pakistan. And so finally, I think that we are saying that that dissent must be given a voice, and dissent within the constitutional parameters. But when I when I speak about the constitutional parameters, that that dissent and voices, then everybody has to play by that rule. Then the constitutional framework must apply, and the discipline that the Constitution demands of its citizens. There is a discipline that the Constitution demands from institutions, from whether it's the parliament, whether it is the judiciary, whether it is the army. Everybody has to then play by the same rules and play by the rules of the Constitution. And even so, if everybody is playing by the rules, the task of ensuring good governance is not easy at all. But there is no other way but good governance if you want to ensure minimization of conflict. And as I said earlier, there are external adversaries who will always come and play up the internal conflicts that exist. And in some cases, like you saw Kulbhushan Yadav, etc., you don't even need internal conflicts. There are those who come and play up and create internal conflicts. And just on the concluding note, India's current National Security Advisor, Mr. Doval, it has now been removed from Google, but on YouTube, there was a lecture he gave at the Mumbai Institute of Management, where he spoke in detail about when he was in Pakistan, sitting outside Data Darbar and Gamesha as an agent, and he was disguised himself as a fakir, and he sat there, and God knows what all he tried to plant in Pakistani society then. So it's not an easy environment. We are in regional environment. All the more reason that we should, the governments, institutions, etc., everybody should strive for good governance, play within constitutional rules. And I think on this I'll end, and the best man to speak on challenges of good governance is Dr. Salman Shah Sahab. Anyway, over to the organizers. Thank you.